Good morning. So today we are finishing with the soil sciences topic. So finishing off with the living organic matter in the soil. So usually what is the living organic matter is those things that are alive in the soil, like your organisms, microorganisms and macroorganisms. Macro refers to your larger organisms such as your earthworms. They are one of the most essential and beneficial organisms that turn over the soil and work or decompose things in the soil. They take larger matter, decaying matter, and they decompose it and turn it into minerals and so on for the soil. So now we're going to look at the microorganisms. So there are 5 main groups you have to know. First of all, I think all of you know about bacteria. There are different types of bacteria. Here's just a few examples. There are spiral-shaped ones. I think in this picture is these little tiny green ones. It kind of looks like string. So they are spiral, and then you have your rod-shaped. These long ones would be your rod-shaped bacteria, and then your round bacteria will be these little green ones. Anyway, so you have bacteria in the soil, then there are also fungi in the soil. I'm going to get a nice picture of what the fungi actually looks like inside the soil, but any kind of fungus that grows on the surface of the soil, their hypha, their legs in between brackets, actually grow inside the soil or through the soil, where they also help with decomposition. And then we have something called algae. Your algae or multicellular organisms, and you can see they are kind of green. Most of them is because they have chloroplasts in them, and they are able to photosynthesize, make their own food, but they also help decomposition within the soil. Then you have to take note of something called protozoa over here. They look like weird sci-fi creatures, but they are microscopic, so small, and they're very interesting because they don't have a set structure, a set body shape. So all of the different subspecies have different structures. Like this guy is a bit green, so this guy can also produce his own food through photosynthesis. But most of the rest of them are kind of see-through and they can't produce their own food. They actually decompose decaying matter and organic matter in the soil and make them into smaller nutrients. Then you also have to know about I'm sorry if I said the word incorrectly, but actinomycetes. They're also small organisms, but they are kind of like a hybrid species. They're not really bacteria and they're not really a fungus. There's something in between, so scientists don't really know how to classify them, probably why they have such a long, weird name. But they also decompose things in the soil. And then I think most of you are aware of soil worms. These are not earthworms, they're called nematodes. They're a class of roundworms. In animals, they can also infest certain animals as an internal parasite. So they are kind of a parasitic, but in the soil they are very beneficial, also used for decomposition. So then, why are these weird creatures and microorganisms in the soil so important? So what are their roles? So they are in the soil because, as I mentioned, decomposition, and what they also do is fixation. So fixation has to do with certain gases like nitrogen that they fixate, take out of the air, and then they deposit it inside the soil so that certain plants can take them up from the roots, so that the plants can absorb them. Then also they're there for mineralization. During the decomposition of organic matter where they release minerals into the soil. And they're also there for synthesis, the building up, and the release of organic and inorganic compounds, also like minerals and things inside the soil. Okay, so then also these microorganisms, I mean, they live in the soil, but they don't live in all soil types. They have certain requirements that they need to be fulfilled before they actually live in certain types of soils. So what they want is a certain type of pH. They like to live in a pH, especially bacteria, in a pH that is around 7.5. So it's close to your neutral pH area, but it's neutral and basic. They don't want too acidic areas. Then they also want things like texture, so whether it's going to be clay soil, sandy soil, and so on. Then they need certain nutrients to be able to survive. Without any nutrients, they can't live. Contaminants, yeah, if there's certain kind of poisons and so on, they will die off and they won't be able to live. And they also need a certain type of soil moisture. They need water inside the soil. About 50 to 80% of the soil needs to have water for them to survive. And obviously they also need oxygen. So there needs to be enough pore spaces inside the soil so that they can actually get oxygen to live. So then, inside the soil with these microorganisms, there are some of them that live in a symbiotic relationship with plants, certain plants. So symbiosis, if you guys can remember, is the close relationship of two different organisms living together. In this case, a plant and maybe bacteria or a fungus. They are different species and they live next to each other. And in this case, these are two examples of mutualistic relationship. So both of them gain something out of this relationship, both benefit out of it. So the first one we look at is the mycorrhiza fungi that live on the roots of certain plants. Okay, so what happens if the mycorrhiza is not there? The nutrients needs to be absorbed by the roots, but what happens is that the roots aren't close to, say the minerals are down here, the roots can't reach. But when the mycorrhiza is here, they act like an extension of the roots. So they can reach these deeper minerals better than, say, the root system. So they act like an extension of the roots, a part of the roots, and they absorb all these minerals. So then as they absorb it, it can also go to the roots of the plant where they live next to. So the plant can also benefit from these minerals. It can also absorb more minerals. And what it also does is it increases the resistance to heavy metal toxicity. So there's so many benefits actually with this relationship. It also, the mycorrhiza, increased drought tolerance and also increases the salt tolerance of the plant. It also increases the resistance to pathogens, any type of pathogens that can actually negatively affect the plant. So it kind of also protects the plant from certain things, and also against it helps it to resist local root pathogens. So any type of thing that wants to negatively affect the plant, this mycorrhiza fungi actually helps the plant. So yeah. Then a second one that you need to be aware of is the rhizobian bacteria. So what this bacteria does, it actually lives on the nodes. It looks like these little protrusions on the roots. They live on the root as well. And they also, the main thing they do is they fixate nitrogen. So they take nitrogen from the air, and fixation means that they either put it back into the soil, take nitrogen from the air and put it in the soil, and they make it accessible for the root to absorb. So they also bring it close to the roots so that the plant can absorb this nitrogen which it needs. And what does the bacteria get out of this? They actually get food from the plant. So through photosynthesis, the plant makes food and nutrients and things. And because this bacterium is living on the root, it can actually get some of those nutrients so for it to survive as well. Okay, then we look at the carbon cycle, but out of the perspective of these microbes. What do they do during the carbon cycle? Okay, so microorganisms, they actually break down also the carbon dioxide. In some cases, like when the decaying material goes onto the decaying organisms, fall onto the soil, these organisms need to break down them through decomposition, as I mentioned. But some things, like your hemicellulose and lignin, these certain structures inside plants are a bit tough for this bacteria to break, so they have certain enzymes that they secrete, and which helps with the breakdown of these compounds and allows the dead organisms and waste products to further decay. And also, if you guys remember, decomposition is the biological process that includes the physical breakdown and biochemical transformation of complex organic molecules, such as animals and plants, to break down into smaller organic and inorganic molecules such as minerals and vitamins and so on. Okay, so it basically just puts back all the living things and breaks them down into basic carbon dioxide. And when this has also happened, it can either fixate and become fossil and be fossilized or be used as fossil fuel, or it can be released, the carbon dioxide, back into the atmosphere. So it's basically this constant cycle of the carbon dioxide going back into the air, being photosynthesized, used inside as during photosynthesis to make food and glucose and things for the plants. And then as the plant dies down, this carbon dioxide is released back into the atmosphere and so on. Okay, then we look at the nitrogen cycle. So it's basically a lot the same as the carbon dioxide one, but now we work with free nitrogen in the air. So here what usually happens is free nitrogen, N2, is in the atmosphere. Then we have certain bacteria that fixates this nitrogen into the soil, as we saw with the rhizobium bacteria. So then as soon as this happens, we get I can't remember what NH3 is, but nitrogen reacts with water, and then we get NH3. And when we get certain nitrifying bacteria, this nitrogen or NH3 is turned into I can't remember all the words. Nitrate. Nitrification is how it's turned into nitrates. And as well, when we have something like manure falling on the ground, ammonium goes into the soil, and it is also turned, can't again remember what NO2 is. Anyway, but it's turned into that, and through nitrification is also turned into nitrates. And with assimilation, we'll look at this in more detail in the next slide, but with assimilation, this nitrate is turned back into amino acids that is used with plants and so on. So it builds protein, basically. It's the building blocks of a protein for plants. And if these nitrates are being denitrified through bacteria, it's turned back into free nitrogen into the atmosphere. Okay, so this is basically your cycle and how these different bacteria at each different stage actually plays a role in converting this free nitrogen into different formats or different forms, and how it's be turned back into nitrogen through denitrification later on back into gas. Okay, so what you have to take note of, which is very important, is your ammonification, as we saw now in the nitrogen cycle. So ammonification is when plants die down. They are decomposed through certain bacteria, and they are turned into ammonium. Okay, so ammonification refers to ammonia, so it's the turning of amino acids into ammonia. Then a process, you guys have to know the terms, what the terms are. And then nitrification is when free ammonium through bacteria is turned into nitrites. Oh, that's what NO2 is. Nitrites and nitrates, NO3. So nitrification turns it into nitrites and nitrates. And then we have something I couldn't find a picture for, is nitrogen assimilation, where either the nitrites or nitrates, see it's just a different chemical structure, where this turned back into amino acids inside plants, the building blocks of protein, where it's turned back into that. Okay, then you have to know about denitrification. So that's when those nitrites and nitrates through bacteria is again turned into free nitrogen gas back into the atmosphere. Okay, then you also have to know what solubilization is. Again, I couldn't find a picture for it, but this is basically when bacteria actually makes certain minerals and compounds. They make them soluble. So it's not that, it's basically a certain reaction that happens through inside the bacteria, where they create or cause certain minerals to be soluble in water. So it usually involves the impact of acids, which are a part of excretions of these organisms. So when they excrete it, this causes those minerals which they ate and excreted out to be able to be dissolvable in water. Okay, then imagine this is your soil cover. This is beneath the soil, this is above in the atmosphere. Okay, so you have your crops. They say crop residue, so this is when, let's say you had a maize field and the maize died down, and now they are the decaying matter. Don't know why the sheep is here, but let's assume the sheep died as well. Then you have your microbes in the soil here, and they turn this material into organic matter. And this is done through immobilization. So immobilization is when nitrogen, primarily nitrogen, is limited. So the soil microbes and your plants that are inside, or the roots living inside the soil, compete for this nitrogen. Okay, so it's immobilization is basically when the bacteria takes up all the nitrogen and there's nothing left for the living organisms to absorb. The plants doesn't have it, the bacteria has it, or they turned it into organic matter, but it's not accessible for plants for absorption. Plants can't absorb it. Then we have something called mineralization, and this is when these decaying matter and things are broken down into smaller pieces. First ammonia, then through microbial actions again, it's turned into even a simpler form like your nitrates. Okay, so mineralization puts back all these minerals into the soil. Then we look, okay, that was your living parts inside the soil, what the organisms do, how to help the soil form and live. Now we're looking at non-living organic matter. And this would be things like your humus. When you have your dead and decaying matter inside the soil, they decompose, and before they turn into simple mineral forms, like it can, something like called humus can be formed, that soil layer. So if non-humus particles refers to any organic matter in the soil that is now dead and decayed, it's still breaking down into smaller pieces. And as soon as that reach a certain point, I want to say like a mulchy, weird, wet, moist, humid type texture and things, it becomes humus and it's very fertile for the soil. And when that humus breaks down even more, it becomes your minerals and things. So with this degrading, okay, here we have an example of a dead animal, your dead and decaying matter, and there are certain factors that affect your rate of decomposition, how quickly this can turn into humus and how fast the humus can even be break down into smaller minerals and things. The first factor is temperature. I mean, the higher the temperature, the quicker decomposition happens, but because decomposition is facilitated by things called enzymes, which only live at a certain temperature. You can't have too high temperatures. So something like in the Sahara Desert, where the temperature is way above 40 degrees, decomposition will actually happen slower because the enzymes die off. So you want the sweet spot of about 30, just before you get to 40 degrees, for decomposition to happen at its quickest rate. Then moisture, you need water for it to happen, the more water there is. And also a certain pH. It says here most microbes exhibit optimum activity near pH 7, so your neutral area, like we saw in the previous slide. The bacteria usually likes pH 7.5, around there. Again, also what it needs is soils should be well aerated. There should be air in the soil as well. And also, if there was dense plant cover on the surface, it means more plant material can die and also become decomposed. That will also increase the decomposition rate. Okay, then we have something called the effects of organic matter in the soil. Okay, they can have three effects. If there are organic matter inside the soil, they can have a physical effect, a chemical effect, and a biological effect. If the physical would be, if there is organic matter in it, you would have a dark color soil. If there is organic matter in the soil, it will make the soil well aerated, and also there will be good drainage. It'll be good drainage area, so it'll allow water to go through, and it'll have lots of pore spaces to allow air to go through. And also it'll enable the soil to be more tillable. So if it was a clay soil, you will be able to till the soil because it makes the soil a bit softer. Then chemically would be all the chemical components inside the soil. It will increase, if you guys can remember, we talked about soil colloids, all those minerals that are able to be absorbed by the plants to react with the surface of soil and the surface of plants. It increases the amount of colloids in the soil and also then obviously the amount of nutrients in the soil. Then biologically, it increases the amount of protein in the soil, which means there would be more nitrogen in the soil. And also with the increased temperature, it will dissolve more plant nutrients the higher the temperature. Okay, so what I've done here on the side is managing your soil organic matter is the key to good air and water quality. So if you overall want a healthy soil with good enough air and amount of air and water inside, we need organic matter. And this is done by having good management as a farmer, enabling a good healthy soil, which then gives you good air, water quality and productivity if you want to plant crops and so on. Okay, then we have the gaining and losing of organic matter. How can we, how do we lose organic matter in the soil and how do we gain? How can we put organic matter back into the soil? So first of all, we have our management practices. This is basically for humans, what we can do to enable that we gain organic material. This is through things like planting cover crops. Okay, this is not a good example of a crop or anything, but we have to have cover vegetation on top of the soil and also a good irrigation. It should be enough water. And here they also give a few examples, making sure there's good or enough animal manure being added to the soil. Also plant residues, as I mentioned, and also manufacturing wastes. So waste should be added to the soil and compost, organic material. Then something like soil texture. Soil texture is fine texture soils, like your clay, can hold much more organic matter than your sandy soil. So it depends on the type of soil you have, whether there will be enough or how much organic matter will be in the soil. Then another factor is climate. So high temperatures can speed up the degradation of organic matter, as we mentioned. So it'll speed up, if the degradation of the organic matter speeds up in high temperatures, it means we can easily lose the amount of organic matter in the soil. So with places with higher temperatures, more organic matter should be added to the soil continually. Then things like your landscape, specifically landscape position. So your low, poorly drained areas. This would be now in a catchment. Say there were two hills, and at the bottom of the hill, low and poorly drained areas which has a lot of water have higher organic matter levels. So everything accumulates basically at the bottom here, and if there's more water and less air, the organic matter would also accumulate and won't decompose as quickly. Then something like vegetation also plays a role. So if you have like a veld type, maybe say somewhere in the savanna, where there's a lot of grass cover, when all the grass die out, it also adds to the soil. And also with the grass roots and everything, when they die, it also adds to the organic matter. So there is a lot of organic matter in areas such as the veld and also in the forest areas, when a lot of leaves of the trees fall down onto the soil, the topsoil area. It also accumulates. So that's why it's, as you know, called the organic horizon at the top here. So it also adds organic matter into the soil. Okay, lastly, we get to soil degradation, what effect this has also on the organic matter composition in the soil. As you can see here, this soil landscape has been completely degraded. There is almost no soil organic matter on the top layers that we can see in any case. So things that affect soil degradation is like erosion. So you can see all the soil has been eroded completely. If this was a cropland, it's not one anymore. So with wind and everything, the sand's been eroded away. Secondly is compaction. Remember, with too much tractor, if there's too much tractors driving over the surface of the soil, it compacts the earth and it can create the earth or enable the earth to crack easily. That's probably what happened in this case. And then salination, in previous videos that we explained, is the deposition of more salt into the soil. And then also with the depletion of nutrient demanding crops. So with depletion, this means that most of the nutrients has gone out of the soil, and now we have a nutrient low or a nutrient poor soil. My apologies. Okay, so other factors that also affect soil degradation is things like soil tillage. If the soil was tilled too much and turned over too much, the horizons were completely destroyed, and this could also have enabled erosion to happen. Then the removal of your crop residues, if there were like dead maize stalks here or something, if you remove it, you remove the organic matter that could have been inside the soil. And then also nutrient mining. If you don't apply things like manure or compost back into your soil, so then you have the depletion of all the nutrients that could have been in the soil. Okay, so how can we avoid this? Is by not tilling too much, and yes, by applying more manure and organic matter back into the soil, and also leave as many crop residues as possible to replenish those nutrients. Don't retill old crops if it's not needed. Okay.